Well, hey, welcome to the X podcast, this week's episode. And I am here with my friend Tim. And you were full of smiles.
What?
You were full of smiles. How are you?
It was good. That was good.
Yeah?
Yeah. How are you?
What's new?
What's new?
You look tan.
I'm tan. Well, just
you look fresh.
Got back from a trip. It was
Yeah?
good. Yeah.
How was it?
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, what'd you do? Where'd you go?
We went to Aruba.
Aruba?
Yeah.
That's not real.
Yeah, that's real.
Okay.
It was really nice.
I don't believe that. Hey, you know what? A lot of times there's so much going on in the world, and I don't know. Well, I do know exactly when this podcast is going to air, but I mean, so many things, who knows? By the time this airs, Elon Musk could have added the edit button to Twitter.
Who knows what he will have done, taken over.
Purchased Twitter. So many things are going on. I saw today that a fifth of the world's reptiles are in danger of going extinct. Did you know that?
Mm-mm.
Have you been thinking about that lately?
No.
Okay.
Not at all.
But let me tell you something exciting you have been thinking about. So this is a really exciting time for you.
Yeah.
You have written a book.
I have written a book.
And it is called
Scary Faith.
Scary Faith. What's the subtitle?
Overcome fear, step into the life you never imagined.
Overcoming fear.
Overcome
fear and step into the life you never imagined.
Yeah.
So exciting. And a few things that are going along with this that are really exciting is we're in the middle of a series as a church based off the book. And you can just tell, even just this past Sunday, people's wheels turning and paradigm shifting of really you reframing faith.
Yeah.
And you bring in the question that is deep inside everybody that we'll talk about, which is, could I be made for more?
Yeah.
And could life be more?
Yeah.
But it's also exciting because as of us releasing this podcast, we're days away from it officially being released, hitting Amazon, available to purchase. And
other retailers.
But
pretty much Amazon.
But mainly Amazon.
Everyone buys their stuff from Amazon.
That's where you go. Is Amazon.
King.
And so it's really, really exciting time.
Yeah.
So I want to start with a little bit of let's do an origin story, a little bit.
Okay.
Why you wrote it, and let's go back to the moment you knew you were going to write this book. How did that happen? Have you always thought about writing a book?
I have. I actually had a goal in mind. 5 years ago that I was going to write a book by a specific age.
What age?
And I'm not going to say. Okay. Which was last year. So I finished the book in that year. So I'm happy for that. Yeah. It didn't come out in that year, but I finished it within that year.
Yeah.
So I within that time frame. But I actually thought it was going to be a different book, and that was years ago. So it really wasn't.
Wait, what book did you originally think it was going to be?
That I can't talk about that. It could be a future book.
Okay.
So in 2019, I had a sense on, I don't know if I remember this, March 22nd. March 19th. March 22nd. I think it was. I have that written down somewhere. Anyways, I remember the moment. I don't know if I remember exact day. It was either March 22nd or March 19th that I just felt compelled to write this book. I had just read an article that my father-in-law had sent to me. And there was something that they said in that article that just prompted me in that moment. And it kind of was about walking on water, and it was about faith. And it was kind of what I'd been living through, going through. And I just something screamed inside of me that day and was like, write a book. And so I just immediately started to scribble the outline. I probably had 8 of what now is 12 chapters in that book. I had them outlined that morning. So the moment you had the idea for that book, you wrote the outline that day. I wrote a good portion of the outline, not all of it, but I just started writing down. And it wasn't hard. It's not sit down and, okay, what could I have to say about faith? It flowed because it was just my life. Yeah. For the last several years.
To me, which, by the way, spoiler alert, I've read it.
Yes.
And it is awesome.
Oh, well,
it's
I appreciate that.
good. It reads so fun, and so it reads so readable.
Yeah.
And
that's my hope.
It is. It's impactful. It's jarring, but in a good way.
Yeah.
But it is very autobiographical. There's a lot of your story interweaved with Peter's story of stepping out onto the water.
Yeah.
And what it looks like to actually live that way.
Yeah. And so it really did. That's why I think it flowed pretty easily. The outline, writing a book's not that easy, but the outline did because these were just things that I had just walked through.
Yeah.
And so they were fresh. I had been walking through them. And so they were concepts that most of this is, most of these things that I talk about in here, concepts are things that I experienced while walking by faith, stepping out in faith, taking risk, trying to figure out, am I supposed to do this, not supposed to this? Am I going the right direction? Am I going the wrong direction? What am I doing? And a lot of it was what truths that I kind of unpacked for myself in that journey. And, some of it I hope will challenge the status quo of what we think faith is. Yeah, that's some of my hope. Some of it I hope kind of pushes back against what people think it means to have faith.
I think, and I mean we'll go into the content, but I think it comforts and challenges. I think it comforts in the sense that you really, and you're big on this. You wrote it not on the other end of having arrived on the other shore, but a lot of this is stuff as you're in the middle of the journey, as you're still trusting God, as you're still taking scary steps, and so you're very vulnerable in it, and you're very accessible, and you're reframing faith to the idea of, look, I'm scared. I experience these emotions. Yep. I experienced doubt, and so I think you comfort people by letting anybody that thinks that the kind of people who launch churches or businesses or write books aren't human, and you very humanize it to say, no, I feel what you feel, but.
Yeah.
I feel what you feel, but still take a step.
Yep.
Still dream for more. Still go after what God has put in your heart and don't let fear stop you.
Yep.
And so it's really inspiring. But that day you had the idea, you wrote down and this is where, if anybody's listening, this is where me and you argue because you are convinced that people think that the writing process is boring.
I'm like, what? We're going to talk about writing a book.
So if you hate this next little few minutes, you can blame me. But one of the things that's been fun is not to circle any of this back to me, but is that we got to kind of go through some of this journey at the same time.
Yeah.
I was in the latter half of writing and producing and publishing and editing and all that, my book, while you'd already been working on it for a while, but somewhat in the first part. And so we got to bounce ideas off each other and maybe, learn from each other a little bit, and you get to learn from my mishaps of all the stuff in the latter part of publishing. But it was a lot. I told you, I have people come up to me now, more people than I ever imagined, that are like, I have always wanted to write a book.
Yeah.
And you actually doing it has made me want to ask questions and want to learn more about the process. And I'm fascinated. Even Kevin, we had a similar podcast this like a year and a half ago. It was like, he was all curious about what's the environment like? What's the process like? Yeah. And so I think, and then we've talked about this, Donald Miller's a big believer that everybody at some point, in some way, should write a book. Writing, Donald Miller, we attended one of his writing seminars. He said, the person that can learn how to communicate through writing can change the world.
Yeah.
He said, if you can write, you're unstoppable.
Yeah.
Because I think any part of communication is powerful. And so I think no matter who's listening, it's always fun to at least just hear process and learn how do you do that. So I'm curious for you, was writing harder than you imagined? I mean, in some way, every week you have to write messages. So some form of writing discipline has been in your life for 6 decades now.
Did you just say 6 decades? Oh my gosh.
So some form of writing discipline has been there, but I'm curious for you. Did you find the process hard? What was your approach to it?
Yeah.
What did you learn? What helped?
So
did you start right away?
No.
Okay.
I didn't. I actually.
So the seed was born.
The seed was planted, outline. Probably shortly thereafter, I kind of wrote part of the prologue. Kind of like, what was the unique angle that I wanted to take in this book. I shared that with a few people, and then I think COVID just kind of disrupted everything for a while.
I remember accidentally discovering that you did it because you did a screen share at a core team meeting that we used to do on Wednesdays. And I shouldn't have done this. I felt bad about it later, but I saw a little icon up on the screen. I was being nosy because you were showing us something else. I was like, is that a book? And you go, you did that little Tim grin. And I was like, oh, you're writing a book.
Nope.
You're like,
Nope. Nope.
And I was like, oh, yeah.
So I did, but I hadn't, probably because I wasn't doing much on it then. So that was in.
Do you remember that?
That was, I think I do a little bit now that you say it. I think it was, so that was in March. I think it kind of, I didn't do much with it. Probably continued to add a little bit of stories here and there as they would come to the outline, but I didn't really commit to writing it then. And then we hit early 2020 and COVID happened and just disrupted everything. And it wasn't until the fall of 2020 when you and I were just kind of, you were getting serious, I think, in 2020 for finishing your book.
Yeah.
You'd been working on it for like 17 years.
Okay.
Okay. Before that. But no, you had been working on it for a long time, but you got serious about it in that fall. Yeah. If I remember, it was like September, October, somewhere in there. You got serious about finishing the book. And it just kind of inspired me. You inspired me. So it's like, okay, I need to get to writing this book.
I give you the 30-minute challenge.
Yeah. And it's the thing is this, books just don't write themselves. My gosh.
Isn't it so much harder than people would think?
Yeah. I mean, you're like, oh, I'm going to write a book one day. When you say that, you probably aren't. You should probably say, I'm going to write a book today.
How would you describe why it's so hard?
Man, the amount of discipline and faithfulness that it takes to write a book is enormous. And I had to, so I actually didn't start really writing. I didn't finish the first chapter. And I remember, I think I sent it to you, and it was, I think, somewhere around December 9th of, I remember 2020.
Yep.
2020. It was in December that I sent you the first chapter. I said, here, read this. What do you think? So that was in December of 2020. I then really tried to stay pretty committed to doing the 30-minute challenge, which is, I think, Donald Miller's challenge, right? Like 30, or is it Donald Miller's? Like, write 30 minutes a day.
If you can write 30 minutes a day, you could have a New York Times bestseller in a year. You could
you can have a book in a year, but
possibly be.
It could possibly be a New York Times bestseller, but I wouldn't guarantee that you're going to be a New York Times bestseller. That's a pretty steep order. But so I was trying to really fall into that rhythm.
Yeah.
And so I was getting up early every single day. I'd get up about 5 o'clock. I would kind of get ready, whatever I needed to do, have some devotion time, and then I would try to write from 6 o'clock until about 7. And then I would kind of go on my day. And so I did that.
Okay, I'm going to be Kevin/Carey Newhoff right now. Describe your writing environment. I know you, so there's not a bougie coffee pour over. Is there a William Augusta pouring out your JBLs? Is there candles lit? Is there dim mood lighting?
No.
Are you at a hipster wooden okay.
It's me sitting on my couch with my laptop.
And Harley? Is Harley nearby?
Harley,
your
is
dog
nearby.
Okay.
That's
So
it.
you're
I didn't have a special writing place.
Feet up and laptop's on your lap?
No, feet are not up. Just sitting down on the couch with
Just
laptop on my lap. Yep, just like that. Yep, that's what a lot of it was.
Ever hurt your back?
I don't know. It hurts a little bit now.
Okay. Yeah.
So I didn't have anything
airplane
special.
mode on.
Nope. No, who's texting me at 6 o'clock in the morning? No one's awake.
I mean, I'm awake.
You know you weren't. So you see, so no one's bothering me. That's the one thing I liked about writing early, is that no one bothered me.
Yeah.
What I didn't like about writing before work was, and this is it's hard to sometimes get into the flow of writing. And then I would get into the flow sometimes, and then I had to stop.
Yeah.
And so, write for 45. I mean, sometimes it takes a half hour, 45 minutes before it's just starting to
before
flow.
You get in the
concept,
zone.
you get in the zone, and it's like coming, and you're like, oh yeah, and I want to say this, I want to say this, and I want to connect that idea, And so,
do you pace at all when you write?
No. Pace? No.
So I'm weird. Like when I'm writing, when things start coming to me, and I really start flowing. You can probably picture this because you see me when I talk on the phone or when I preach. Like I have to get up and I start pacing.
Oh no!
And I start walking and I start.
Oh really? No, I just stay seated the whole time and I just keep typing away. So I did that for about. Well, it took me then about 6 months really to write the book. So
That's crazy. So about an hour a morning, about 5 days a week.
Probably not even quite that, but I would do it 3 or 4 days a week. But then a lot of times
on the weekends you would
on Friday.
I remember that
day off on Friday. I'd get up early, and I would sometimes write for like 2 or 3 hours on Friday mornings. Yeah. Sometimes on Saturday, not a ton. I'd usually be off on that, but I would. So that helped because I would then get into the flow, and I would feel like I get something accomplished.
Right.
So I did that for several months, toward the end of it, I just wanted to get it finished. So I took some time off. I took like a week off, a week or week and a half. I can't remember what it was, but really in a week. It was amazing having. So when I did that, I sat outside. It was in June. I was like on my front porch. So I just sit outside, and I would spend 4, 5, 6 hours writing. When I did that, I was able to actually, I probably wrote 4 of the 12 chapters in like 2 days. But you actually can if you have dedicated time to do something like that. Yeah. So I guess anybody that wants to write a book, I think there's probably a couple of different methods of what you can do. I think if you're busy, you have a lot of other things to do, at least carving out 30 minutes to 45 minutes a day to write something. And maybe you could set yourself a goal. If I could write 1,000 words, I didn't ever do that. I wanted them to flow. I just wanted, I didn't kind of set, it was more of a time. Right. I want to put time in on it. Yeah. It takes a lot of time. You put a lot of time in on it.
Yep.
And so I did that, and then...
And how... mentally.
Yeah.
Talk about the mental... Because for me, the biggest battle is mental. What was...
Staying with it, consistent with it, not getting tired of it,
you
getting
battle
sick
the thoughts
of it, going back.
I'm spending all this time and no one's going to care.
No one's going to care. This is going to be awful. Sometimes, I'll tell you, I finished... even finishing, when I finished the manuscript, which was in June, I think it was like June 17th of 2021. So it would have been, it's about 6 months, a little over 6 months later. When I finished it, that's a great feeling when you're like, feel like your rough draft is done. You're like, oh, you just take a little bit. But then you find out that's when the real work starts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because I think that the
process happens in the editing.
I thought the process after it was way worse than the process of writing. And there was parts of writing I loved it. We've talked about that. Yeah. I enjoyed the revelation. I enjoyed trying to figure out how to process some thoughts and nuanced thoughts down on paper that I think would challenge people. That would, Did you
have any? Did you have any just surprising? Let me ask you this because it's. I told you Monday I went over to Kevin Jones' circle, and they were actually doing kind of like a small group guide of the book I had written, which is kind of weird to be there. Yeah. It's honoring, but it's weird. And they're asking. They asked me questions like, "Okay, did this come out of your journaling? Did it come out of your over?" And I was like, I guess I said for me it was kind of a combination. I'm curious. I'm curious for you. For me, I was trying to process out loud. I was like, I think part of it is just life experience pouring onto the page. Other parts is notes I've taken along the way as I've, from messages or just things I've journaled. And the third part, and I'm curious if it was for you, is I felt like I was finding surprising discoveries as I was writing it.
Yeah. 100%.
Like there's probably a quarter of it or a third of it that I would get done writing a chapter or section, like, oh, it sounds
good.
Like, oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I was not planning. I had a kind of a general idea. So I'm curious for you, how did that play out?
Yeah, I had, so you know how I approach things. I mean, I would have a fairly
because you're pretty
detailed outline for each chapter.
Yeah. Okay.
Like here's the base story. I want to, here's some of my life experiences in this. Here's a concept I want to wrestle. I wouldn't have it. I just have an outline. Just like I want to deal with this issue, or I want to deal with this concept, or I want and so I knew what I was doing. I just had to figure out how to get there. Yeah. And I would but there are definitely, I agree with you. I think that actually was the most exciting part of writing. And it's very similar for me in what I do with sermon prep. It's the same kind of thing when like revelation comes when you're studying, when you're trying, like that happens. That happened in the writing process that helped. And probably because I'm using some of scripture and some of this, and there's stories
and you're engaging
from there.
Your mind.
Yeah. And you actually have space and time to do that and to process your mind with it. And
would you say that was your favorite part of writing?
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite part of writing was like you said, was finishing a section or finishing portion and going, I never would have seen that before, realized that's freeing, that's whatever, Yeah. And so for me, that was the revelation, the feeling like I had something to say, feeling like I think it will be, I'm just picturing this, I hope will be freeing for people when they read this. I hope this will help people connect dots that maybe they hadn't been able to connect before, because that's the way it felt for me.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminded me, I think it was that Stephen King, I think, even said, I forget if it was in his book on writing, but he even talked about that happened with a lot of his books. It happens with a lot of his books with fiction. Now, granted, I think this can exist in fiction and nonfiction. I think if I recall, he talked about, and again, he's a fiction writer, but he was like, if the book surprises you, it'll surprise the reader.
Yeah.
If you go into writing a book, you know exactly what it's going to say, and you do that, it's probably not going to be. I thought it was Stephen King that said that because he's talking about fiction. No, I think Stephen King also did. And I think he says something into that, like going at like, because he was talking about character development, and he was talking about when you're doing fiction, and it was like, I think he would say, I would get into the book, but I have no idea, is that person going to die? Is this storyline going to come? And the storyline would unfold as he was doing it.
Yeah.
And those were the most the best, the well-received books, because you're as the author, and this is a fiction, discovering it as you're writing the story. And I think with nonfiction, perhaps for me, what I've seen in books I've read, and this is the first one I've written, perhaps there's that same incredible discovery process, but it's happening with a concept. It's happening with a truth.
Right.
It's not a fiction story that you're creating, but it's you're discovering. And when you discover something that kind of lights a fire inside you, then hopefully that translates to the page and to the words, and it hopefully will light a fire in someone else.
No, that's good. It's interesting too, because that book by Stephen King on writing was, I know, so impactful for both of us. And he has such an interesting take on fiction, like you said, because a lot of fiction authors are like, no, you need to have a whole outline. But he basically, I remember one of the things he said for him in fiction writing, to have a plot is unimaginative.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, that kind of flies in the face of everything you would think. And, that doesn't work for everybody.
Well,
but it is interesting.
It's okay. I think, in every movie there is a plot, but having the plot before you do it, probably in the book or a script, I think life doesn't reveal itself as a plot ahead of time.
Yeah, that's a good thought.
You know what I mean? You live it and you discover the plot afterwards. And so I think that's kind of the essence of what he's trying to say. And I think it's true for writers. I think it's true even for nonfiction. I think there are chapters I went back and looked, and I started writing and went off into this direction. I went back and looked, I didn't even use that or that story or that thing or that piece, and it didn't matter. Yeah. Because that was the concept that really was born out in that moment. And so, for me, that was probably the most thrilling part. That's the part that would drive me back to writing again. Right. I have other books in mind and ideas and things that I want to do. I so much connect with and identify.
What
with
are some other?
No, I'm not talking about it right now.
Is your first book what you end up writing similar to what you thought it would be? I mean, you said you had another idea, but is this?
No.
Are you in a way surprised that this is what you ended up?
Yeah. I mean, I am, but I think the reality is,
because I think it's very you.
This book has a lot more. See, I always thought one day I'd write books to help people. This book is more about me going through the journey and discovering, and with that helping. And I think I removed myself from the process in my mind years ago. Years ago, it would be like, I think I understand Scripture well. I understand this. It's what I do as a pastor. I want to help bring people toward what I believe is truth about God, truth about life. And I think I would have seen it more from the perspective of this truth will help you, versus I think this came more from this is what I experienced. And I hope it has more impact because of that. And I think it's shaped probably how I would even approach writing a book anymore as an author. Yeah. Like I not only want to, I think you need to have something to say. Yeah. But I think you need to have something to say because you experience something in life. Yeah. I think otherwise, I don't know that it really matters that much.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, because when you've been through something, you have, and you share both the good and the bad. You're standing on the two twin pillars of credibility and vulnerability, and you need to be credible enough for people to want to hear what you have to say, but vulnerable enough to actually connect with people and bring them into a story. And vulnerability has always been key, but especially now, that's I think the key. Yeah. And so you actually invited people into the story and into your life, and spoiler alert, a lot of this is you pretty much planted a church from scratch. You took a leap of faith out of a rising career in the IT world, and you and your family, and you go through all the ups and the downs and the leaps of faith, and the times you didn't know if the money would be there, the times you didn't know if the people would be there, the times you didn't, and so how did you? because one of the things people have asked me, and our books are different, but how did you decide how because I had somebody 2 weeks ago, actually, a young girl in our church tell me, I've been wanting to write a book. And her question was, how do you decide what to put in and what to put out? How personal to be? And when is too soon? And we kind of nuanced all of that from my perspective. I'm curious for you, as you were writing yours, were there things that you ended up leaving out because you're like, it's just, I don't think it's appropriate or appropriate now? Or are there things that you put in that you're surprised you left in? How did you nuance all that?
There's not a whole lot that I put in that I was surprised I left in. There are some things I left out for a variety of reasons. There's been experiences that I've had along the way, just in all of my steps in this journey of, like I said, the steps of faith and planning a church and doing that. I think sometimes, you look from a perspective after 18 years of doing this. And it's easy to kind of highlight and put everything into like just really, pretty package of, well, like you said, I mean, you can surmise it so quickly. You left a career, you did this, you didn't know, but here you are.
Right.
The reality is that it's a lot harder along the way, and there's a lot more pain involved along the way. There is heartbreak. There is loss of relationships. There is so many difficult things you walk through. And I allude to some of those. I don't go into some great detail in some of them. Not that I won't. Some stuff I've left out because I want to put it into a different book and I want to do it justice. I feel like some of the stories were so entwined and for me to be able to share them in a healthy way and an honoring way was just going to take away from what the concept of this book was. Yeah. And there will be a day I'll share more things and more stories and more things, but in an appropriate environment in an appropriate book. Yeah. And so I did make some decisions to not include some things. And so there's people that have been around the journey that knows some of the painful things that we've walked through and been around it. And, there's some where it's like, oh, there's a paragraph or two and that's it. Yep. And there's obviously far more to the story there that has shaped me. But some of that I'm saving for, I have some other books and ideas because I think that they will apply to other parts of my journey. Yeah.
So
more so than this.
So I heard you say three things. One, that you, when you're deciding what to put in or put out, you want to do it in a way that's honoring.
Yeah.
Number two, you want to do, part of what they say in writing a book, crafting a sermon, whatever, is pick your controlling thought. Yeah. So if it detracted or went into a rabbit trail from your controlling thought, it didn't make it. And third is you don't have to put everything in there. No. And
not everything needs to be shared.
Did you put a cutting room floor?
I have a document.
And that'll go
I don't know if it'll all go in there. I had sections of things that I wrote that I ended up going back and cutting out. And so I did. I have a document where I was like, chapter 1, and anything that I cut that I was like, well, there was a story, there was this. I took that content and I threw it up there. Yep. Maybe I'll use it sometime, maybe I won't. There are definitely things that went on the cutting room floor. Probably not a lot. I did a lot of editing along the way, which is something they don't recommend you do. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yes. Like you should edit afterwards, but that was rough.
Quickly, let's talk about editing process because we almost went there. So editing process, you said, was the hardest part.
Yeah.
Walk us through that.
Well, I think the editing was so challenging. It's not because I cared so much like, this isn't good, cut this. That didn't bother me as much as it's complex and trying to, I just think it's hard today to know who to trust with editing, and you went through that process a little bit, and there's some editors or people that are just going to come in and go, change this, cut this, do this. I sent it out for a lot of people to peer review as well. So I was trying to get feedback from people and, trying to process all of that. Right. And, and go, okay, that is somebody who is reading the book. Their feedback is important. It's valuable, even if I don't change it to go with what they do, but I have to understand that was their perspective. So, I think editing, I'll make that a little bit of a bigger process. There's editing, there's peer review. There is, I think what was challenging, I had a couple people kind of edit. I mean, you kind of went through it and did a version of kind of editing and some stuff. You were one of the ones that not only peer reviewed, but I think also said, hey, I think you could probably reword that and make it better, or I think this needs more color, or I think this. So you really helped me a lot in that process. Then I had an editor. Then I had someone else. I had a couple other people proof it, which one person was more like an editor than a proofreader. And so there was a lot of conflicting edits.
Yeah.
And I was like, is it this person's edits or this person's edits? Because they're saying the opposites.
Right.
I don't know what to pick. So some of that was just frustrating. And I think writing rules have changed so much.
Yep. And some seem fluid.
Yeah, and some seem like, and then some would be like, well, you can do that or you can do that. Well, which one's right?
Right.
Whichever one you want. Okay, which one do I want? And again, these are minor things, but they're things that you obsess about when you write.
Yep.
These are things like, should that word be hyphenated?
Yep.
Well, I don't like the way. Or are we going to write out all numbers? Okay, you're doing Chicago style editing, which you should with nonfiction. Okay, which means that all of your numbers from like 10 and above are written out, but I don't like the way it looks on the page, and people are breaking rules. And so, can I do these as numbers instead of writing them out because I don't like the way it looks? You know what I mean? So there's a lot more to it than you ever would think, but it was just the editing and publishing / marketing process is just one that you just go, I just want to be done with this. It's a lot. It's a lot of work. You know what it's like.
Yeah.
I got to the other side, and I thought writing the book was grueling, and it was. The discipline you need for that was really, really hard to write. But when I got done, I felt more satisfaction out of that than I did what I've done the last 8 months or year almost.
It is hard.
That process is really.
It's hard to describe how mentally draining, grueling,
mentally taxing.
And
on top of everything else you have to do in life.
Right.
I mean, I'm still working, still coming to church every day, still preaching sermons, still writing a mini book every single week. I mean, I tell people it's my daughter. She's in school, and they talk about I got to write this 3-page paper, and it's double spaced, and blah, blah, blah. And that's when you're in high school, it's a lot.
Yeah.
I'm like, I write 13 pages single spaced every single week.
Right. Yeah.
A paper.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty much. So, of course, that might be 14-point font, but it's just a lot. I got into the habit of doing that, so that helped me.
Yeah.
Of doing that, but I do a lot of writing, because I write my sermons out before I even give them.
Yep.
So I just got in the habit of doing a lot of writing. So, but it is mentally taxing, and when you have it hanging over you, and you just want to get it over with, and you just have to stick with it.
Yeah. How do you feel now, having finished it? How's the?
I feel good. I'm really glad. So there have been so many iterations of the interior, the exterior of the book. I've had it proofed numerous times by numerous people. I've gotten multiple proofs back, made changes to it, keep finding more little things, spacing, error, this. I'm kind of at a point where I'm not looking anymore.
Yeah.
So it's like it is what it is, and you have to just put it to bed, ship it.
We had a podcast episode about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, where we had the creative team, and Pastor Trey was talking about the one of the books by Seth Godin, and his phrase, at some point you have to ship your work.
Yeah.
You have to ship your work. You just have to say, it's done.
Yeah.
I'm shipping it.
I'm kind of at the point where if I find something and I could modify it, but I could ship it. Thank you.
Designed by
Tucker
Johnson.
Tucker helped me design it. Tucker Johnson. He's on our creative team here, and it's funny how all of that comes together, because it's really hard sometimes. You can have a concept, but then create a visual of the concept.
Yeah.
That was,
And I love it. It's bright, it's bold, like the book.
Yeah.
And so, at least for a minute, the whole thought of it, it seems the burning passion for you is, what if there could be more to life? Mm-hmm. And it's something that I think people at any point in their life ask, but a lot of times I feel like it can just be really easy to suppress that.
Yeah.
If depending on the environment you grew up in, depending on how hard life is, depending on how much life has disappointed you, and so talk to me about that. Do you think because sometimes some people debate. We've heard Erwin and Aaron debate this. Like, is there a deep gnawing and hunger innately inside people to do and be great, to live heroic lives, to be caught up in a story bigger than themselves? And if so, why does it seem so many of us just settle for less, seem to be good with a 9 to 5? pay the bills, and I'm good.
Yeah,
and how does this address that?
And I addressed it a little bit week 1 of the series that we've done that's not in the book, but I do think that exists in all of us. I can see that because of the creativity, the imagination, the innovation that kids can do naturally. And I talked in there about a study that was done by George Land and Beth Harmon that did a study back in the 60s for NASA. Well, they were developing something for NASA, turned into doing a study to find out about creativity with kids, and come to find out like 98% of kids at a really young age score at a genius level creatively. Whereas today as adults, it's like 2%. So we've gone from 98% are really creative to at some point by the time you become a teenager or an adult, only about 2% register as a genius. So something obviously changes that we lose this imagination, this creation of like I talked about at the beginning of the series about how I used to imagine worlds that I would go in and I'd have to fight bad guys. You know, I wanted to be a ninja.
You wanted to be a ninja?
Sure, yeah, and I'm sure you probably did too.
You wanted to be like me.
Yeah, I wanted to be like you, a ninja who was breaking boards on fire. And I think that exists in us for a reason. I don't think that's by accident. I personally think what happens is that we end up settling to pursue, I would say here in America, we will pursue the American dream rather than a God-given dream. So we have been convinced that the ideal life, the idea of success is to be comfortable. Is to not want for anything. Is to, be able to retire at a certain age. Is to be able to take trips. And it's like these are the things that we glorify. And while experiences like that can be fun, I'm not sure they're that fulfilling ultimately. And I think why I really wrote that is because my journey in leading this church, and I understand that there's a disconnect between, okay, you feel like you're in ministry and called to kind of lead a church, and there's a lot of purpose involved with that and all of that. I kind of reject the idea that, okay, a pastor has a significant purpose and a business leader does not. I don't think everybody needs to be pastors and be in ministry. I really think we need people in every facet of life. But I think if you are going to follow Jesus, then you are invited to and you're called to walk away from control over your life and to follow what he wants to do through you. And I do actually think that there is the marrying of a purpose that we were innately given when we were created. And I do think that we are self-medicating in our culture. We're self-medicating through things we can buy. We're self-medicating through trips, through stuff, through all kinds of other things because we don't know how to deal with the sense of there's not fulfillment.
You said something Sunday that I thought was so good. You talking about that burning bonfire internally, however you phrase it, that's inside all of us in youth. To explore, discover, become, and how, as we grow up, many of us take that internal desire and fire and end up living prodigal lives instead of purposeful lives. And everything you're saying about, we self-medicate reminds me, Viktor Frankl, the psychologist, that was part of this, survived the Holocaust and went on to create logotherapy and all that stuff. He has this famous quote where he says, when man can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. And I was actually watching, I forget, some leader last night in the business world. They actually said, it was speaking to men, but he said there's two types of men. There's pleasure-driven men and purpose-driven men. And pleasure-driven men always have a deep inner sense of angst and sadness and addiction. And he said, but the purpose-driven man has a deep sense of joy and discipline and passion. And so I think you're hitting on something because I think a lot of times what we really think is depression could just be a lack of purpose. What we think of as deep anxiety is a lack of meaning.
I think what I've experienced, and the reason why I've experienced this is because I've been in positions, or I put myself in positions where I have to make some really scary decisions that take faith. And my goal is to equate that to just everyday life because it may look different. It might not be you're leading a church, but you could be leading a business organization. You are leading a family. You all have to make scary decisions about whether or not you're going to uproot your family and move over to this place to pursue this job or this career. Or it could just be like personally, like what are you passionate about? I really think that our purpose is often found and it's tethered to our passion.
Yeah.
Like what bothers you?
Yeah.
What bothers you? And I think we have become so comfortable that there are so many things that bother us, but we don't actually do anything about them.
Yeah.
And I just think that we will find the most adventure, fulfillment, satisfaction, like the life that I'm living and have gone down, it is like, and I talk about it in the book, is really scary. Yeah. Like I'm making decisions that are like that, this could change the rest of our lives. This could bankrupt the church. I don't know if this is like, but I also know, and one of the reasons why I had to circle back around and write a 13th chapter, it's not chapter 13, but an epilogue, is because of some of the miracles that I had seen come out of those decisions. And I just think, are we settling in general for a life where there's no supernatural things happening, there's no miracles happening, there's no impossible situations, you only attempt what you're pretty sure that you can accomplish? Or are we actually living kind of life where we say, I trust God, and if I feel like he's leading me to do this, even if I don't have the resource and I don't know how it's going to turn out, I'm still going to step. And that's kind of what my journey's been, and I've been writing it from the position of I don't know what's going to happen. We built this facility. I talk about building it. I talk about all the things that happen with it. I talk about building it, and then COVID happens. I talk about all these things, and it is scary. And I don't for one second, like I want to remove the stigma. That's the whole point around the title. I want to remove the stigma that to have faith means you don't have fear.
Right.
I actually think that the phrase that it kind of brought out in one of the shirts that we have is that your future exists in the space between fear and faith. Yeah. And they actually have far more in common than we might ever realize. Right. And I think the key is not to live without fear. Yeah. I think the key is to live with faith. And you're going to have fear. And it's not letting fear dictate you and control you and paralyze you and cause you that. But it's also, but I try to get real practical. I try to use some neuroscience and other things that I just love to kind of help us like understand why we react in certain ways that we do. And how do we actually take steps to overcome that so it does not keep us from stepping into the future that God has for us. Yeah. It's so good, and I love all the science tidbits you put in there, and it's fascinating. It's such a, but you're really in this series and through the book. You're reframing faith. Yeah, that's my goal. A couple quotes. I don't know if you saw. I put together just a little. I don't know what you call it, but it was all my favorite quotes from Sunday, and like it's faith isn't about what you believe, but who you obey. Yeah. Faith isn't about knowing what you're going to catch, but it's about going to fish anyways. You said, what were some of the others? Faith isn't tethered to a result. Faith isn't tethered to a result, but to your obedience. But to your obedience. Yeah. I heard somebody say something similar one time. They said faith isn't about an outcome, but an outlook. Yeah. And so I love that. But you're also dealing with something that, as you walk people through your own story, which is this thing that, like, faith and certainty are opposites. Yeah. And so one of the things you're dealing with is, like, really what you're talking about is to live a life of meaning, and you go into this, you must also live a life of risk. Yes. Not risk for risk's sake. Right. But a kind of a holy risk that the reason, like you said, we don't experience the miracles, we don't experience the supernatural, is we remove ourselves from the context where any of those things would even be needed. Yep. So what does it look like to have something that pulls you forward into the waters, to use the Peter analogy, that actually causes you to risk, but to realize that just because you risk with Jesus doesn't mean the uncertainty's removed of how everything's going to turn out. No. And so I love that because part of it is you're writing from the place of, hey, as I was going through this, I didn't know it was going to happen. I trust God, and somehow or another, however it turns out, he's going to use it. Yeah. And so it's, and there's more of that in Scripture than we realize. We've talked about one of our favorite stories is perhaps the Lord. Yeah. There's this story where they're talking about going out and facing the enemy and taking a mountain. And they said, who knows? Perhaps the Lord will give us victory. Yeah. But there's this boldness
from a faith perspective, this is one of the reasons I love the message of this book, is that true faith should catalyze you to run towards the future.
Yes.
True faith should cause you. It says in Proverbs that the righteous are bold as lions, not tame.
Mm-hmm.
And so something about true faith should actually move you to action. That was one of the things you said, is you nuanced the thought of faith moves the heart of God, and you said no, faith should move you, and you actually moving moves the heart of God.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. There's so many directions.
Faith is just such an active thing, and my goal was to really, like you said, I wanted to reframe faith. I feel like it's been twisted and manipulated, and it's not a formula, and it's not a feeling, and it's not a mystical force. It's not just like a force where it's like, okay, I tap into this, or it's not, it's not I can name and claim anything I want. It's not that. It's so hard because it's one of those concepts. It's not, you can't put your hands on. It's ethereal. It's, you know what I mean? But it's real. Yeah. And so those are hard concepts to sometimes wrestle with. Yeah. And try to nuance, but do it in a way that is from Scripture, in a way that is from my story. Yeah. That has been my experience with it and my journey with faith. Yeah. And so, again, I never thought I would write a book about faith. I really didn't. But as I followed Jesus into what he called me to do, and found out very quickly that I can't do what he's called me to do without faith. Right. I have just been stepping and walking in it, and having to make decisions that are getting harder and harder and bigger and riskier and riskier. Yeah. And it's really been through that perspective that I wrote this, and I did. If you read the prologue, I wrote it from, I don't know how things would turn out, and some of the decisions that we've made, we're still living in them. I mean, some of the huge steps of faith that I talk about, whether it was with our building and other things that got even bigger once I get in and I tell the story. I wrote it, I don't know. That's why I had to go back and write an epilogue, and it still isn't all of it, but I wanted to say, like, after I finished writing it, some of the, because God just continues to bring provision little by little and day by day. And I could sit back, and when I look at it, the whole thing, it's really scary. And there are so many thoughts that I've had that I didn't put in that book that may come out in future ones. But just, how do I cope with the fear? Yeah. I talk a little bit about it, but there's more layers and levels to it.
You got to get it. But the thought hit me because this whole concept I just resonate with so much. But you can remove risk and feel secure, but if you remove risk, you'll never feel alive.
Yeah, so good.
And you would probably say it's in the moments when you took the biggest steps of faith that you wanted to throw up in your mouth, and yet felt so alive.
Yes,
because that's
some of the greatest moments of my life and ministry have been on the other side of the biggest steps of faith ever taken, the biggest risk. And I write about that. And for those who are newer to our community, they won't know some of those stories. And so some of this will allow you to kind of relive some of the stories of like buying a building and going to Lithopolis, which seemed like an impossibility for a small church that we had, and what it was like when people showed up. And, just it's really hard to communicate how you felt in a moment. But all I tell you is, like, you never forget how you felt in those moments, because it was so impactful to you. Yeah. And I think those are like you said, those are the kind of things that we should be experiencing. That is what it means to be fully alive. And I just wonder if we are settling down and settling for less. Yeah. And if we are living lives that, though we might be breathing, we're not really alive. Though we have a pulse, we're not really following a purpose. And I just wonder if there's more. And I know there is, because I'm living in it. But I don't think it's just for me. I think it's for every person who says, I will follow Jesus. Yeah. And it'll look different in their context. It'll look different than what God's called me to do, but it'll still be scary, and you'll still feel alive. Yeah. Fully alive. So
I love it. Yeah. And I can say this, it's very accessible. So anybody listening, even if you're not a follower of Jesus, you'll still love the book. Yeah. If you're not a church planner, but you're a 16-year-old girl or a 30-year-old single mom, or whatever place you're at in life is so accessible to the human experience that you will fall in love with it, and it's going to inspire. And I just can't wait for people to get their hands on this book, because I know it's going to change a whole lot of lives. So any last thoughts? It hits May 17th. Amazon, wherever major online places can be sold. Buy several copies. Leave a review.
Yeah, leave a review on Amazon. I'd love to know what you thought of the book. You can go to scaryfaithbook.com, which is the URL for the book, and there'll be resources on there. We have a companion reading guide that has questions and things. So if anybody ever wants to, because we know this with your book, it's like, hey, we have a book club or we have a small group that wants to do it. We're going to have kind of a guide that can go along with that, have questions and maybe challenge you with some action items for each chapter. So there's going to be a lot of resources. So scaryfaithbook.com. It'll be out on Amazon. And May 17th and other places. So
excited. May 17th, we're going to party a little bit.
Yes.
We're going to have a celebration.
It'll be fun.
And a whole lot of lives are going to be changed. So if you've ever thought there's more to life, get this book, buy copies for friends, leave a review. It may not sound like a big deal, but when you leave a review, you give a more prominent space on the internet for people to actually see the message.
It helps
of this
an
book.
author. It helps us, especially a self-published author. That's all part of the algorithms that Amazon does to kind of get it in front of people when they search for it.
So shameless plug. This is going to change your life. Scary Faith by Tim Moore. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or comments, always send those into podcast@thex.church. Thank you always for joining these conversations, and we'll see you next week.